I was not ready to do a panic podcast about the Warriors, but I watched that Suns game last night and I was alarmed. And I think Steve Kerr was too, because he was about as candid in the post game about just what he didn't like and where the team was at. He usually doesn't do that, especially 15 games in the season. This was different, but I felt that way watching it. There was no fight. They seemed disconnected, and it's the same stuff we've seen all year. They're 0-8 on the road. Is it panic time, Rob Mahoney?
We're kind of getting there, you know? And I think you're right to zero in on Steve Kerr's response, because when he's calling that stuff out over what he knows as well as anyone is a long season for a championship team, there's still plenty of time theoretically to round into shape, but the effort is not there defensively. The focus is not there defensively. I mean, frankly, if Steph Curry scores 50 points in a game, you should win it. And the fact that not only did they not win it, they didn't even win his minutes, that is a huge concern.
Didn't like the look on his face during the tail end of the game either. That was the rarely seen kind of like semi-traumatized Steph Curry. Just had that kind of vacant look in his eye. Curry is having the second best year of his career. Statistically, it's the best.
I think it still might be the best. You don't think this is the best?
Well, statistically it is, but they're not getting the wins. But I'm just saying, like, in 16, when he was doing basically the same kind of stuff, they were actually winning and they had the right team around him. 32.8 points a game, 53, 47, 93 splits, 30.4 PER, which is where he was in 16. He was in that range. And then the big thing, 5.1 made threes. He's the only person who's had 400 plus threes in a game. And it feels like if he gets the minutes and the games played this year, it'll happen again. But it's sad this time because there's nothing around him. And it's like the second best player is Wiggins. Third best player, I guess, is Poole, even though he hasn't, I think, has been as effective as last year. And then it drops. And the drop is, I think, what they weren't expecting this year, right? They knew there'd be a transition. I think they probably expected to get one more pretty solid Clay Draymond combo year. And then maybe that starts easing toward the rookies. But those guys, I just think they've kind of cratered this season. Clay especially, because if Clay's not going to shoot the lights out, I don't really know what he brings to the table as a two-way guy anymore. So let's start with Clay.
Yeah.
Kerr was making excuses for him. And that's his right. He's the coach, but he's basically like, Clay's trying to hit a home run with every shot, all the stuff he said after. But I see a guy who's not rebounding, who's not getting to the rim at all anymore, who's not the same defensive player that he used to be. So basically now he's just a three-point specialist. He's basically, you're turning him into Sam Hauser overnight, which I don't think is where anyone wants to be. What do you see with Clay that I'm not seeing?
Well, I mean, to build on that point first, I think as far as the 3 or nothing or threes or bust kind of mentality for him, he just has no game inside the arc. Just is passing up any chance he could possibly have to have a layup. And it's especially stark because you see Steph on the other side of this, who's been as good driving the ball as we've ever seen him be, just finishing and creating in so many ways inside. And like, God, I just keep coming back to the juxtaposition of those two guys, because right now, of all the players taking 15 shots a game, Steph is the most efficient. Clay is the absolute least efficient. Outflanking, the Dylan Brookses and the Kevin Porter Juniors and all of the guys you would expect to be in that company. That's where Clay is. And none of us want this to be the case. Like, Clay is a beloved NBA figure. He's a guy who all of us love to see deliver in big moments, but he doesn't have that offensive part to his game. To your point about the defense, not only is he not great defensively, but he's being targeted. That's a different place in his career. That's a different space to occupy when teams are thinking of you that way and going at you that way. It's really hard to watch him like this. And especially in these games where you see him hit his first couple shots and you have to wonder, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Does this mean we're going to see him pressing in the second half because he's feeling it, even though he hasn't hit half his shots in any single game this season so far? He just has not had it.
Is that true?
That's true.
Oh my God. Yeah, because we thought when the Booker thing happened, the way he reacted to that, and it felt, I was saying how it reminded me a little of that Dr. J Bird fight when Bird was just so much clearly better than Dr. J and was talking shit, and it finally snapped. You mentioned a crazy thing with him. He's taken 15.4 shots a game, but he's averaging 15.1 points a game.
Yep.
If you're averaging that many field goals, it's almost impossible to have less points than that, but that's where he is. It's really rough. I don't know what the solutions are, and I think he feels the pressure, right? Like he works so hard to come back. came back last year. He averaged 20 a game last year, coming back off this stuff. And then in the playoffs, didn't look great. But then in the second half of the Boston series, started to look like Clay again. And the defense came back in the Boston series.
For sure.
That's why I'm so surprised by this, that the defense is now gone. And like you said, like when they're targeting him, that's a whole other animal. It was like when Luka started targeting Ben Simmons in that one game. It's like, oh, this Ben Simmons thing is bad. Luka's now like, bring on Ben Simmons. I want to torch him. So you have that piece. And then you have Draymond, his fall as an offensive asset, which has been a couple years in the making now. But now he's 8 points a game. He doesn't shoot threes at all anymore. He's only averaging 1.1 threes. He's basically given up the threes, but he also doesn't get to the free throw line. So now you have two guys who don't get to the free throw line. Neither of them really rebound either. And like one of the things that's alarming, you could look at all the different offensive defense. We could go into fancy stat mode, but how about let's just look at, they've taken 300 free throws this year and the other team has taken 413. It's at 14 games.
Brutal.
So they're taking 66% as much as the other team at the free throw line every game. That's bad. Rebounding wise, 41.4, which is like 27th. Giving up 45.1. So over and over again, they're losing on the boards. So now we're losing at the free throw line. We're losing on the boards, but we're also not shooting threes that well other than Curry. There's not a lot left. That's why I feel like 6-9 is not an accident. 0-8's not an accident. When you're on the road, rebounding, get to the line, like there's things that happen that can swing that. But if you're not doing either of those things on the road, that gets even worse.
And the rebounding thing is new. The Warriors teams, like pre-Kevin Durant and even some in the Kevin Durant era, those were not especially good rebounding teams, and yet they found ways to win. Last year, the Warriors were a really good defensive rebounding team, and they've just completely fallen off a cliff. And some of that is just like who they're plugging into the rotation of various spots. Some of it is Draymond getting a little older, Clay getting a little older. You're relying so much on a guy like Kevon Looney at this stage, and you're relying on Andrew Wiggins' like night-to-night rebounding effort to really make all that stuff work. But I think the formula we're seeing is if you're a team that cuts in offensive rebounds, you're going to score 120 points on the Warriors. The question is Steph going to get 40 or 50? And are they going to get just enough from everybody else to put them over the top? Because what this feels like to me, I don't know that we've seen any point in, I mean, you have to forgive me for calling this the dynasty, but of the Warriors dynasty era.
The semi-dynasty,
The Warriors semi-dynasty era. They've just never had this little room for error before. And
to your point, last year they, from a rebounding standpoint, they were 45.5. Their opponents were 42.6. So not only is that flipped, it's even flipped a little worse from their end. And I honestly don't know how you solve it with the guys they have, because I think Wiseman they were counting on.
Yeah.
And you go back.
He in theory could be that, but he doesn't really show a lot of interest on the glass a lot of the times. He doesn't really have the strength or the body type or even just like the box out technique for it.
I don't know what to do with my Wiseman stock. I talked to my NBA accountant the other day about what to do, and it's just so low now. It's not even worth selling. But
it's got to be a hold, right?
Is it? I mean, I guess the reason to keep it is the trade, and we can get to some of the trade possibilities in a second. But I just think of that 2020 draft. And I haven't seen, maybe somebody's written this piece, I haven't seen it, but such a weird draft, right? We had the pandemic. We have a college basketball season where there's no March Madness. And then we have this goofy draft where if you go back and you look at it, the only guy you would say in the top 12 that has a chance to make an All-NBA team is probably Anthony Edwards. And Halliburton, I think, goes 13th or 14th. But you go on the line, you'd be like, oh my God, Wiseman, man, they missed that pick. It's like, okay, who were they taking? Who should they have taken instead? Should they have taken Isaac Okoro?
Pat Williams?
What are we doing? Williams? Should we, could you have taken a Okongwu second over Wiseman? Nobody's doing that. Should they have traded back? I remember making the case during the summer. I thought they could have traded back, potentially picked up another asset. I know that they liked Halliburton. I think all the smart teams liked Halliburton. They weren't going to take him at 2. Could have maybe traded back and taken him. But you just had a weird draft. That was the only bad draft out of the last 6 drafts, basically, right? If you're the number 2 pick in any other draft, that's an incredible pick. Like a year later, that's Evan Mobley, and it was just bad luck. They've had a lot of good luck, but I think that was bad luck. I don't know what happens with Wiseman, but it's hard to imagine him staying on this team, would be my guess.
It's going to be like he has a long road ahead in order to just like get to NBA level competence. But games like this showed that it's not just him either. Like they were relying on him to be a big time player, but they sent him down to the G League. They went up against a Suns team that is not very deep. Missing Chris Paul, missing Cam Johnson, missing Jay Crowder, if you want to include him in that conversation. And yet even their second unit was doing more than enough. And a lot of that is just because like the Warriors defense is that accommodating where Steph is scoring 50 and yet like Campaign is playing like Steph against you. And that's kind of the trade-offs the Warriors are playing with right now.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The fact that Campaign lit it up on national TV.
Torched him.
That had to have driven Kerr the craziest out of anything. So Wiseman, they're hoping, expecting they can get 20 minutes a game out of. Now he's in the G League. They signed JaMychal Green to be the Porter replacement. I have never been a JaMychal Green fan. I've never gotten it. I've never understood it. And I feel like he's one of those guys that looks good on paper and the stats guys like him. But when you actually watch him, I just don't get it. I don't like to me, he's like a slow stretch four. He's like kind of a super duper discount version of better stretch fours I'd have. He's already been benched. DiVincenzo, who I always kind of wanted to see on a team like this, but the catch was, well, can he stay on the court? He's already missed a bunch of games. They lost Porter in the green spot. And then the big thing for me is losing Peyton, which we knew was going to be a factor. Peyton's been hurt. He's coming back on Portland soon. But, last year, at least they had lineups where you're like, oh, they're playing this lineup. Like they had their defensive identity lineup with Peyton. And those guys just really played well together. And I don't even know, like, what is their best 5-man lineup now? Would you say it's Curry, Poole, Wiggins, Green, Looney? That's probably the best 5 they can put out. And that's in the league this year. That's not going to be good enough with what's happened with Draymond. Then you'd be like, well, put Clay in the Looney spot. Okay, well, now I'm not getting any rebounds at all. So I don't really know what the answer is. And I don't think they do either.
I don't think they do. And really, I think a lot of the pressure points when we're talking about this stuff are kind of circling around Clay and they're circling around Jordan Poole, who has just been incredibly up and down. And I think mostly down. Just has not had it. And I think you brought up a great point about Clay in terms of him feeling the pressure and how that affects his play. In a way, these are like the two worst kinds of players to feel pressure. In terms of Clay, a guy who is so reliant on three-point shooting, and now you're making him live and die with every miss. That's an incredibly tough and isolating place to be as a player. And on the other side, being a young, dynamic ball handler who's trying to figure out, like, when do I pass? When do I create? When do I pull up? And you're feeling the pressure of being up and down every game. It's just a bad recipe for Poole, too. That's going to lead to some like really poor performances just in terms of like walking that line.
Yeah, and it's a talk radio point to be like, well, Draymond punched him in the face, so that's a weird way to start the year. But guess what? That was a weird way to start the year. Draymond
move,
and Curry
punching your coworkers in the face.
Yeah, Draymond, Curry, and Looney are the leaders of the team. Draymond is the on-court energy, kind of emotional fulcrum of the team, for better and worse, right? And you could see like game 2 in the finals when he knew they needed a different kind of energy. He stepped it up. He got into it with Jalen. He's yelling at the refs. He just went full Draymond. Haven't seen that guy this year. And it's been like, I don't know what the right verb is, maybe like defanged, which is a weird used word for a basketball player, but I just don't see like that crazy in a good way Draymond on the court. And even yesterday with like 4 minutes left, he started trying to bark with Ayton, and it was like, you don't want to be in the position where you're the ex-champs near the end and you're trying to talk shit, but you can't back it up anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem. He can't back it up anymore. So I don't know where that leaves him either, because he can't be like aggro chest out guy when the team feels a little fractured. So I don't know how that plays out either. What do you think with Draymond?
Well, it's hard to earn back your teammates' trust and call them out for playing shitty defense at the same time. Like it's just an impossible place to be as a leader on that side of the ball. And I think if there's one kind of macro silver lining here, I think it is that Draymond factor you talked about, that we have seen just so many times in the playoffs that he can step up his energy, his focus, his intensity in exactly the way that they need defensively. And you would hope that if they can just get through these next couple months and kind of get things aligned and kind of figure out what their bench situation is, that he'll be able to be that for them in the end. Because I think he's been okay. I don't think he's been a total disaster by any stretch this season. Offensively has been tough at times. Defensively, I think he's mostly been pretty good, but he needs to be great. Like that's just what they need from him on a nightly basis. And so then if you get into this conversation of like, oh, well, will Draymond be able to be the best version of himself when it matters? I mean, your team is like 12th or 13th in the West right now. It kind of matters right now. Like they may need playoff Draymond, 20 games into the season. That just might be the reality of what this Warriors team needs.
And look, I know nothing. As Scott Van Pelt would say, I'm just a guy sitting on my couch. I think if he fell on the sword a little bit publicly, I think that might help this whole thing. Like, I think when you're really the leader or one of the leaders, like if he came out today and was like, you know what, we've sucked this season and partly it's my fault. I really fucked up before the start of the season. I think it started us off weird and we've got to get back to who we were. And part of that's my fault. And I'm one of the leaders of this team and I got to fix it. He kind of went the other way. Like at opening night when he's wearing that green suit, he's got the documentary on Turner before the game, that there was a lack of kind of understanding about what kind of moment that was just from a public perception, right? So then now you're opening the door for people like us to talk about it. But also like you are one of the leaders. Like being one of the leaders means you're looking out for everybody. You're inspiring people, but you're not undermining them like that. And I really think that hurt them this season. And I don't think that's like a crazy take. No. I think when you're a team that's built on chemistry and the emotional connection and the joy that team had last year, the thing I've seen, especially in these road games, the joy is gone. I don't see it. They don't have like that swagger. And I don't know when that comes back. You watch like even a team like the Celtics, who they beat in the finals. The Celtics have a little like swagger to them, right? They know they're good. They're on the road. They're like taking a lead from 15 to 26 in Atlanta. And they want to like, they have a little killer instinct. And I just don't see it with Golden State.
And that's where games like this set off the alarms. Because you would think if they're going to show up for anything, if they're going to be the old Warriors for anything, national TV game against one of the best teams in the conference, against a team that had their number earlier this season where there was a little bit of spice in that matchup. And there's just nothing here. They're giving up 18 points in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Like that's just like an unacceptable level of execution from a defending champion. It's the reason why this conversation starts slowly shifting from like, can they get it together to what options do they really have to eventually we have to start talking about like, are they just squandering an amazing individual season from Steph?
Well,
like,
and that's why
just
we're
a completely wasted opportunity at a certain point. But they have time to figure that out, but we have to start kind of tilting that way a little bit.
They have a top 5 guy. They've won 4 titles. You have to fix this and save this. Yeah. And the West is open, I think.
Extremely.
Right? Is there a West team that like completely scares you? There's some good ones.
But
I don't think anybody's grabbed this season by the balls yet.
Not at all.
Like I wrote down teams I liked. Denver, Memphis, Phoenix. All 3 of those teams I have questions about.
Sure.
Right? Phoenix, I don't know what I'm getting from Chris Paul over an 8-month span. I don't know what they're trading Jay Crowder for. They were allegedly trading him. The trade hasn't happened yet. Memphis, I don't know if those guys can. Bane's already hurt. I don't know when Jackson comes back. Can I see those guys play together for 6 weeks before I decide that they have the West by the balls? And then Denver, do you feel awesome about Porter right now? Like, do you feel like he's going to be there 6 months from now? Because I like him, but I don't know. And I think he's too important to what they do. I just don't know. I don't trust it.
He's had some really incredible games, but he needs a larger body of work to build that kind of confidence. And frankly, so does Jamal Murray, who post-injury, definitely you can see him and feel him being a little tentative, overthinking some of his opportunities. And we need the Jamal Murray that is reactive, that is looking to attack guys. Like that's the most interesting version of that player to watch and project, and certainly the most valuable one to the Nuggets. So hopefully he can get there by the end of the season. But you're right. Like there's just no teams in this Western Conference landscape that are grabbing this right now. And even some of the ones we thought would be pretty good, like Dallas is blowing some games that they really should be winning. Minnesota is just not anywhere near where they need to be a contending team. The Clippers, obviously, and they're going to get, supposedly getting Kawhi Leonard back soon. So we'll see how that goes. But there is a real opportunity here for anybody to seize control of this thing, if only for playoff seeding, much less for whatever's going to happen in the playoffs.
Well, the other thing in the West, and this speaks to how unusually deep the league is, like you just watch night to night, and like the Kings can beat the Warriors, right? You watch and it's like, doesn't feel like an upset. Like talent-wise, they can play with those guys. And sometimes it'll just come down to the variance of who hit more threes or did somebody get into foul trouble. But for the most part, like even a team like OKC, who we thought was going to be the bottom, but they have an awesome player. They play well together. They can hang around in these games. They can steal games. So
they can guard people.
Yeah. There's no night off really across the board, except for only a couple teams, I think. So when you look at the West and it's just night after night, it's somebody decent. We didn't expect the Blazers were going to be good. Well, the Blazers have been good. You know, Minnesota.
Number one team in the conference right now, Portland Trailblazers.
Right. Minnesota hasn't been good, but guess what? They still have good players in their team. And night to night, you just never know. So I think that's another thing with the Warriors. So the West is there to be grabbed, but the longer they don't do anything, 6 and 9 could pretty easily turn into like 15 and 23. And now you're in the danger zone. Now you're in the play-in. You know, and then that gets even hairier. The question with Wiseman and Kuminga is those guys had, I think, a real amount of value last summer, and I don't know what that value is now because neither of them have played well. And you have the league knowing now if the Warriors have to make a move, those two guys are going to be in it. So like people are, Durant is starting to get buzz again as a possible trade target for them. Durant gave a couple interviews that, as usual, one of the reasons you got to love Durant, like he's pretty candid, like he doesn't pull punches. That thing about, hey man, I'm in this lineup with Sumner and he lists all the guys. He's like, how are we supposed to be good? It's like, Jesus, nobody says shit like that.
Royce O'Neal and Nick Claxton didn't deserve that. Come on.
That was a drive-by. But now people think Durant might be available. To me, Towns has to be at least on a little bit of a watch if that Minnesota thing. I know he's harder to trade because he just got an extension. Davis on the Lakers, you never know. But there's little fringe stuff they can do, right? Like they could do something with Indiana. There's Miles Turner potential. Miles Turner's kind of seems like he's available. There's Pirtle and San Antonio who's around. I don't know. I feel like there's moves to be made, but how far do you think they would go? Do you think they would go full scale? We have Curry, a generational superstar. We have a window right now. Here's some picks. Here's Wiseman. Here's Kuminga. Well, Moody's on the table. Like we're getting another awesome guy. Or do you think they'll try to patch it together?
I'm inherently a little skeptical that they'll just throw all the young guys in. I mean, for one, I think Poole is pretty well set with the Warriors. I don't really include him in that conversation.
I don't either.
It's more of a Moody, Wiseman, Kuminga conversation as far as like how many of those guys, if any, could be moved.
And their picks.
And the picks.
Like pick swaps. They have all that stuff available, I think, that they could get frisky with.
And the Warriors have been very insistent on playing the long game in terms of like their public comments that they are playing the long game with those guys, that they still believe in them, that they still believe in their long-term prospects. They were also very publicly insistent that like, oh, D'Angelo Russell is a long-term fit here. And we signed him to keep him and he's going to be a part of our core. And then he's gone. You know, like these things happen. Things can turn very quickly. And so while I think the hope would certainly be to let a veteran crew sort itself out, I mean, I would not be surprised to see at least one of those three young players gone by the deadline. It just seems like we're heading in that direction one way or another. The only question is like, who do the Warriors target and kind of what do those packages look like? Because we've seen a lot of evidence at this point to suggest that like just being a good veteran isn't enough to plug and play in this system. Like Kelly Oubre is a good player for lots of teams. He was not a good player for the Warriors. And that's something I worry about with a guy like Miles Turner, who can be really valuable in a lot of contexts, but like quick hitting, read and react type stuff is not really where his strong suits are either.
Right. It's about that Landale, people like that. Some guys that know how to play the game.
The Anthony Lambs, apparently, you know?
Yeah. I'm trying to think what I would do if I were them. Like it's the same thing I would have done this summer. If I had a chance to get Durant, that would have been my first thing to figure out. The second thing I would figure out is what do we do with this Draymond thing? Because I think he's going to opt in next year because I just don't think he's like 26, 27 million next year. And I just don't think he's going to get that in the open market. Clay, I feel like they can't trade. As weird as that sounds, I just think he means too much to everything. And that's a really, really, there's only a couple GMs, I think, that would be that cutthroat. Like Danny Ainge would have traded him in 5 seconds. There are a couple of people that do it. I just don't know if the Warriors are wired that way. But I do think they would trade Draymond, and maybe that's part of the answer here. And I was in a trade machine trying to make trades and trying to figure out, like, could the Lakers get Draymond and Kawhi and Kyrie? Could Russell Westbrook end up in Brooklyn? Could Durant end up, like, you start doing these 3-team, 4-team things, and it's like, I can't figure out why Brooklyn would trade Durant unless they were just getting, better than what Minnesota got for Gobert, or if they're getting Brandon Ingram, something like that. So I just doubt they would trade him. But maybe there is some version with Indiana and Miles Turner and some other piece, and maybe you get Brooklyn in and they just take Westbrook back to get rid of Kyrie, and maybe they get some sort of little sweetener. I'm sure they're in the office thinking about all this stuff, right? Like, what do we do? How do we get out of this? And I would say it's Wiseman, it's Kuminga,
yeah,
and probably Draymond would be the 3 pieces. I don't think they would trade Moody.
I mean, Kuminga's the guy who, if you're just thinking from the perspective of other teams, you could see a lot of potential value in where his career could go, just even in a slightly different context, where you're asking something a little different of him, where you're putting him in different positions. And certainly Jonathan Kuminga is a guy who plays with the confidence and has the opinion of himself where he thinks he can fill those other kinds of prospecting star roles to step into something bigger. We'll see if he ever gets that opportunity here or elsewhere, but I kind of lean the fact, like, I do think if they make a trade, it's going to be more on the role player end of the spectrum than the, like, Draymond is also in this package and we're gunning for stars. I just don't see all the pieces kind of aligning in a way that the Warriors would need for something like that. Not to put too much of a damper on you and your studio, really putting the masterpiece on canvas with this thing.
Listen, I wasn't using, like, the paint. I was using my mess around paint. I was using, like, one of my cheaper canvases. Now, the Draymond thing, part of the problem is he's, like, they need him and he's not playing well for them. So if I'm another team, I'm like, well, why would I trade for him then if you guys don't want him? The Lakers would be the only one. And I mean, there's Davis possibilities if that Lakers season goes completely sideways, right?
Sure.
Towns has to be watched. Other than that, I mean, everybody's pretty happy with their teams. It's not like there's all of these solutions falling out of the sky, right? And that's another issue with this. So you're probably right. Maybe it's patchwork stuff. It's probably people at that Miles Turner level. But ultimately, they might have. I think the window might have come a year earlier than maybe everybody thought. I really thought this was going to be the transition year for them. I thought they were going to be good. The pool thing made me nervous. And now, I don't know. But all I know is they're wasting one of the great, not only Curry seasons, but one of the great guard seasons. Like, this is like one of the, like, through 14 games, this is one of the greatest guard seasons non-MJ seasons we've had. And they're kind of pissing it away.
He's been absolutely unbelievable. And, like, that really is the tragic piece of it so far. And what'll really make this a shame if they can't salvage it in some way.